Hi, I'm Nikki Lowe, and welcome to the Wisdom for Working Mums podcast show, where I share insights and interviews that support women to combine their family, work, and life in a more successful and sustainable way. As mums, there's probably not a week that goes by that we don't worry about the well-being of our children in some way, shape, or form. But with the pandemic changing the way we live, work, and even school, for many children, this time has created unsettling changes, often leaving us as parents feeling unresourced in how to support our children. A survey published by the NHS in September 2021 revealed that children's mental well-being had declined from 2017, with now 1 in 6 children in England having a probable mental health issue. And also children with existing mental health problems also reported that lockdown made their life worse. And this has coincided with closures or reduction of key services, including mental health services and youth services. I don't know about you, but at times I felt like I've needed more support and resources to navigate some of these worries. That's why I'm so excited to introduce you to my guest, Dr. Esther Cole. Dr. Cole is a clinical director and clinical psychologist at Lifespan Psychology, where she supports both adults and children. She worked for the NHS for over 12 years before starting her own psychology practice. Esther is the co-editor of the Psychological Therapy for Paediatric Acquired Brain Injury, Innovations for Children, Young People and Families, and is honoured to have received the Early Career Award 2020 from the British Psychological Society's Division of Clinical Psychology. I've had the privilege of working with Esther, so I was delighted when she wanted to join me on the podcast to help empower us as parents on how to navigate our children's mental health, not only in her professional role as a clinical psychologist, but also as a mother of 3 children herself. And in this episode, we explore actually what is mental health for children? How would we spot the signs if our children were struggling with their mental health? And Esther shares some really practical, simple, but powerful kind of tips and strategies that we can implement with our children, with ourselves, and in our homes that can make a difference. And she also gives some great signposting to other resources that may be useful for us if we want to explore this in further detail. And you can find all of the links and to all of the places that Esther shares in this episode if you head over to the podcast episode page, which you can find at wisdom for FOR working mums mums.co.uk/70. So that's wisdom for working mums.co.uk/70. And also, if you're listening outside of the UK, Esther references a lot of UK-based services, but you can use those to really find your equivalent in your own country. So everything she shares, I think you'll find incredibly useful. So let's go ahead and bring on Dr. Esther Cole. So welcome, Esther. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast show.
Thank you for having me. Really excited to be here.
So I wanted to start our conversation with why you're so passionate about this work, because I know it's really important to you. Would you mind sharing a little bit about why it's so important in your journey to this point?
I think I really wanted to do this podcast today, Nikki, because overwhelmingly so, I'm coming across referrals from parents who are really concerned about their children and finding that there just aren't the resources or the psychologists or therapists out there. And actually it's a minefield to sort of navigate the different services, and waiting lists have just kind of exploded after through COVID as well. And I'm just really pleased that you've given me the opportunity today to talk to parents, to think about maybe thinking outside the box, novel ways that they can either directly support their children or indirectly support them if they're not able to access a child psychologist or a child therapist in the time that they need, really, because it's really crucial that children get the help they need when they need it.
Yeah, and I love that you're empowering us with the tools and insights and signposting us in this episode. So thank you so much for reaching out to have this conversation. And I know before we hit record, you said that, the waiting list has exploded. And I think you were saying, is it privately, the waiting list can be up to 6 months?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in my own practice, I can't speak for everybody, but I've, since joining private practice in 2017, I've noticed that we're increasingly having longer and longer waits. So privately, it could be 6 months. I'm based in Southwest London historically, but I cover out of London, and we work internationally now as well. But and the NHS waiting lists, I'm frequently hearing from parents 9 months, a year, 2 years,
wow.
Which is obviously really concerning.
But yeah, particularly if you're in that place where you just need some guidance and you know that your child's suffering in some way.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously today we're talking about children's mental health. But what do we mean by this? Kind of how would you explain children's mental health?
I think that when we think about children and their well-being and their mental health, what we want to see is, children thriving at school with their peers, enjoying life, happy, healthy, growing. If that makes sense, in the kind of fullest sense, that they're happy and healthy and thriving and developing, and if they're older children, able to kind of take on the pressures of exams and peer pressures and university applications. And I think that when the child's mental health has been affected, you'll notice that day-to-day things are really difficult. So it could be really difficult for children to go to school. There could be a lot of anxiety around going to school, or eating. They might have more problems eating, problems with sleep, bedwetting, numerous things really, behavioural issues. So what you'll tend to notice is if a child's mental health is affected, often there's normally some things that could trigger it, sort of stressful events, just the same with us really, anything traumatic or stressful, or kind of things happening in the family, and just noticing like lower mood, withdrawal, things like that really, and things that would concern you because they've kind of lasted longer than you'd expect really.
Okay, that makes sense.
I hope so. Yeah, it's very generally speaking.
And I know that it was really important for you to share that in this conversation, it doesn't remove the need to get professional help if it's needed.
Yes, I really wanted to be able to speak to all parents, but I'm aware that the advice that we, come up with together today, it's not going to be one size fits all, and it isn't going to be a replacement for getting an assessment, going to your GP or a doctor or psychiatrist, or seeking that professional help. So I'm speaking extremely broadly about, a range of different conditions and range of different scenarios based on my experience and sort of the work that we publish in our book and things like that. So, it's not going to be a substitute for professional help.
Yeah.
Or courses that you might do, like parenting courses or things like that.
And hopefully, I think the idea of this is to empower parents with what steps they can take. And so I know what you're going to share is going to be so useful, and it will probably mean that there's a next step that has to happen. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
So what are some of the key issues that you're seeing in your practice with children's mental health?
I'm definitely having more referrals for self-harm and obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety disorders, issues around separation and divorce and how that's impacting children, particularly after, in the aftermath of COVID as well. I think those are kind of the main referrals, and unfortunately context of domestic violence as well.
And would you say that it sounds like that the referrals have increased? So it's not, I'm imagining that those issues might be something that would have shown up in your practice over the years anyway, but that there's a kind of rise in those.
Oh, absolutely. particularly from my experience anyway, the referrals were getting more and more self-harm, and it's very, very difficult for us to accept referrals for self-harm because we don't operate a crisis service. And so in order to do that work, we would need to be working alongside NHS teams or other organisations, charities or other organisations, in order to provide that 24-hour care that could be required. So yeah, I'm definitely seeing more self-harm, OCD, and anxiety overall, I would say, and issues around relationships and separation of parents and how that's affecting their children.
Yeah. And so it sounds like the pandemic has potentially been a catalyst for some of those things. But I'm imagining kind of our modern lives are also kind of a catalyst as well, thinking about social media and just how we're living these days.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that the combination of parents having to do the absolute impossible of homeschooling and working full time. Sometimes both parents were working full time with children, small children or young, teens, having to homeschool them, get them through exams, work, all under one roof. This is impossible situations, aren't they? To think we've actually survived a lot of that now is pretty amazing, but it's not without its the kind of effects really on our mental health, ours and our children's mental health.
Yeah, totally get that. So I suppose for anybody listening, they might be going, yeah, I can relate to some of the challenges we've had over the last 18 months. And, they might be on a scale of concern with their child's mental health and mental well-being. But it would be easy to kind of feel overwhelmed by the statistics and the situation. But I know the whole reason for this podcast and the reason you wanted to do it is you wanted to empower listeners with the gift of knowing how to support their child. So what are some of the things that if somebody's listening going, do you know what, I've got either, I'm somewhere on that spectrum. I'm either mildly concerned to, I'm quite severely concerned. What kind of advice or insights could you share?
So there's lots of, I'm going to cheat a little bit and use some of the techniques in our book to kind of illuminate what we could do or what we could do as parents. Obviously, I'm a mum of 3 as well. And some of these tips are helpful for me. So
yes,
one thing I think is really important, and it can just be really helpful if I'm doing parent consultations. And I wanted to go into those a little bit with you because I think that whilst it might be difficult to access kind of long-term or medium-term therapy for your child, there might be ways that you can get parent consultations from different professionals, kind of one-off sessions or follow-up sessions or sessions that are sort of less frequent that you might be able to fit into your diary a bit better. So certainly something that I do offer are parent consultations, even when I'm doing long-term therapy, because it's really important to be able to support the parent and to get the background history from the parent or parents, sorry, should I say. And one thing that's been really helpful within those consultations is to map out the system around the child. So thinking about all the resources in the network. So it could be school, university, it could be relatives, friends, professionals involved, dietitians, physios, OTs, social workers, whoever it might be. But to actually map out what the existing resources are and like who's actually available within that system, child carers, babysitters, you could go on, couldn't you? Kind of like do a spider diagram of that and really think about what are the issues, what do I need support with, who might be able to help. And even that alone is it's the tip of the iceberg, but it's still kind of giving you that really, really broad understanding of like your system and where your child, which the context that your child's in and what sort of support there might be.
And it's interesting. That's actually an exercise I use with my clients about mapping out their system to feel resourced. And I'm hearing you're doing it almost from 2 perspectives. One is actually what's the support and network I've got around me, but also what's the context in which my child is kind of interacting and living.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think making time. So, I haven't kind of kind of giving you a list of all the different techniques I might come up with, and some of them are just common sense. But making time, I think, is really important. So you know, doing that broader analysis of the context is really important. What your resources are for your child, but also making time to really understand and listen and find out what's going on for them, and making time to carve out that quality time. And I know it's very difficult, particularly if you have more than one children, or you work and more than one child, or you work full time and so on. But I think really being able to sit and listen and spend quality time and understand the child's perspective, where they're coming from, if they're able to talk to you, or to help them talk to someone else who might be, you know, a support, could be a grandparent, or it's just somebody else, but kind of helping the child to feel heard.
And have you got any tips for children that aren't big talkers? So what I'm imagining is, often when I pick my son up from school, I'm like, "You had a good day?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I don't get a lot from him. Whereas with my daughter, she tends to share more, even though she's a lot younger. So have you got any tips on, if you've got a child that's not a big talker, or not somebody that naturally shares? Often my son will share as he's falling asleep. It's almost like his brain's unwinding then, and will often share it. And my challenge is, often I want to get him asleep as quick as possible.
And that's when he wants to talk to you.
Yeah. So I'm like, I have to build in that contingency to go, okay, he might want to talk then, so I've got to give him the time and space. But have you got any tips for how you might engage a child in a conversation if they're, you know, they might be withdrawing or not?
It was so lovely to hear you share your story with your son, because it's exactly what you just did, is what I would recommend. So you've observed your son. Like, we know our children, we're around them, you know, more than anyone else, apart from school, I suppose, school teachers. But we know them on a really intimate level, don't we? We know them from before they were born. And I think observation is really key. That might sound a bit clinical, but in the sense that, you know, you get to know them so well, even if they're not talking, you can observe how they're feeling, or what they might be thinking, or what their times of the day are that they might talk to you. So you've really nicely expressed that. And it might be that, you know, that time of the night, his sister's not around, and so he feels like he can talk to you more, or I don't know. But really kind of observing what your child's like. And when it comes to behavioural issues, this is the kind of really key tool for a clinical psychologist is, you know, I often will go to school and observe a child's behaviour if there are some issues. And it might not be what they're saying, but you can, there's something called ABC, and parents, I think, can use this too. And there's kind of a lot of information on it. The antecedents, the behaviour, and the consequences. So if you want to know why a behaviour is happening, there's a chance that something happened just before it, or there was something in the context that could have triggered it.
Yeah.
So it's looking at that ABC, like, why is that behaviour happening? And also something really useful that I've used across the lifespan with all ages, including my older adult clients when I worked in NHS, something called the Newcastle model, which is basically looking at challenging behaviour, but in the context of what an unmet need might be for that person. And when we think of children with disabilities, or older adults, or children with health conditions, obviously you've got to put that into the formulation as well. But there's something about what that behaviour is communicating in terms of what an unmet need might be. And I think that's really important, particularly if a child isn't really expressing their needs verbally or communicating verbally, really thinking, what is this behaviour? What is the context behind the behaviour? What are the consequences of it? And what are the unmet needs that might be there?
And so could you give us an example of an unmet need and how you might see that show up in a behaviour?
Oh, really good question. So sometimes the children I work with OCD, for example, the kind of outward expression might be the fear, the obsession with contamination, like the fear, you know, of causing harm to their family, of passing coronavirus or something else onto their family member that would be really harmful. And then the behaviour obviously will be hand washing. and very frequent hand washing. And the unmet need there could be, and every child is different. So I don't want to kind of extrapolate to every child. But the unmet need there might have just been, particularly if I've seen like OCD worsen around stressful times, like exam pressure, it might just have been the need was to find a way to manage the anxiety around their exam stress.
Yeah.
And strategies to help cope with revision and exam and pressure. Or the unmet need the unmet need basically there would be like a need to manage stress. Or it could be a need to spend more time with parents. I tend to find that with some younger children that kind of secondary benefit of some of the behaviour is to spend that additional time with the parent, consciously or unconsciously. And it's not, and I don't like any kind of use of the word manipulation with children. I don't like that. Don't endorse that. But there's something about a need being met there, if that makes sense. So
yeah, totally. And it's making me think of transaction analysis about, we want to be stroked, and if we can't get the stroke in a positive way, we'll find a more unhelpful way to get the stroke. So I totally, I understand that.
And I think this is where another kind of technique or strategy could come out. There's an article on it in Psychology Today, and it's again looking at OCD, but anxiety in general. So what we tend to do if our child is anxious is obviously most of us want to support them with that. So if there's a fear of something, we want to eliminate that fear. So it could be a fear of touching door handles, or picking up laundry because of contamination fears. So we might well do the laundry. We probably do anyway, but do you know what I mean? For an older child, we'll open the door, we'll turn on the shower, or do the laundry, stack the dishes. Don't do any, don't allow the child to be exposed to anything that could trigger that fear. And the article was saying there's a really helpful model called SPACE. It's giving your child that space. It's supported parenting for anxious childhood emotions. So it's looking at how can you provide that space for your child to develop that confidence to tackle that fear on their own. So rather than opening the door for them or stacking the dishes or turning on the shower, how can you support your child, give them that space to do it themselves in an encouraging way?
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, so I quite like that model as well.
So you're not just rescuing them from the difficulty, you're supporting them to handle the difficulty.
Yeah, absolutely. And so another technique might be something like building in rewards for like feared situations. So kind of creating like a hierarchy or a ladder. So you can be quite visual with these things, and you can sort of from 0 to 10, like what are the circumstances where you're most scared? And so I've helped children and families where there's issues around sleep and like sleeping in their own rooms alone. So I might create a hierarchy around what are the situations where you would feel less scared? Like what's a 5 out of 10? Would it be if you were in mum and dad's bed, but they weren't there? Would that be like, a 5 out of 10 scary? What would be a 10 out of 10 scary? Sleeping in your own room. And so we'd gradually map out what the steps were, and then they get a bigger and bigger reward, like the more fear they were able to kind of overcome. So, and that's like a really helpful one. And that's what I've supported parents to do. So rewards can really help.
And is it the child coming up with a reward? How's the best place to put the reward system in?
Yeah, really good question. So I find that it's always collaborative. But if I'm thinking about the parent, obviously the parent will be taking lead with that if they weren't having any kind of psychological input. So they would, maybe mum, dad and the child would think about, and when I say mum and dad, I'm aware that families are more complex than that. So it could be a carer or foster carer or grandparent, but just, parent carer, come together with the child and kind of brainstorm like what would be fair. Would a cinema trip be your big 10 out of 10 or a holiday abroad. For some families it might be we get to go to on holiday at step 10, if they can afford a holiday abroad as a reward. But it's different for everybody. And it doesn't necessarily need to be big. Lots of small children like stars and stickers. And do you know what I mean? Just little tokenistic kind of rewards that, I think even we like them as adults. If you get a certificate for something, oh wow, I got a certificate.
It's that positive reinforcement, isn't it? So yeah, totally get that.
I got an award I got a certificate for my award. I'm really chuffed with that, so.
Yeah, and it's just making me think, Esther, because I'm my daughter's struggling to sleep. We've moved her out of her cot bed into a toddler bed, and she's really struggling to sleep in there. And we're just about to buy her a double bed because we think that might be kind of the answer to it. But she's got used to coming into our bed at night. My son never did. Yeah. So and what you're saying makes absolute logical sense, but I wouldn't have thought of actually sitting her down and doing this with her. So it's making me go, actually, as we're building up to a new bed being delivered, is kind of going, right. So if you can spend a night in your own bed, what's the reward ladder for her? So yeah. And again, it's logical sense, but I would never have thought of doing it until you just said.
And you've got with the hierarchy, you can gradually remove yourselves from or her. So she could do a night that's 0 out of 10. She's not scared at all. She spends a night in your bed. But then she could do half a night in your bed. So you'd put her in her own bed halfway through the night, and then it would be an hour in your bed, and then it would be 5 minutes. And another lovely way that parents can get involved, and something I would do in sessions, but again, I still think parents can do this. It could be something that they can enjoy as a family, but you could write a storybook about it where she was the main character in the storybook, and how, sorry, remind me of your daughter's name? Sorry, I should know.
Ava,
beautiful. Yeah, so Princess Ava, and what challenges she's going through in her kingdom, and are there any monsters or anything that come up for her in the night, and really work on who those characters are and what they're doing. And it's called narrative therapy. So what you're doing is you're externalizing what the fears are. So it's no longer Ava being scared. It's the monster that says boo in the night or something, whatever she's seeing or imagining. And then there's actually these really cool worry monsters you can buy on Amazon. I don't know if you've heard those.
I have, yeah.
Yeah, where she can write. I mean, she's probably a bit young, but you could write it down for her, and then the worry monster will eat it, and you can it's really, really fun.
My goddaughter used those, and it really helped her actually. But again, these are all great tips, Esther, because it's stuff that I'm aware of, but kind of it's in my distant kind of consciousness. So you're bringing all these brilliant tools and ideas in, so I'm loving these. So just to summarize what we've talked about so far, you talked about the parent consultations and mapping out the system and making time to really understand and listen and really kind of understanding your child as to when they might be ready to talk.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about the ABC model, about what kind of preempts the behavior and what the consequences, and you talked about the Newcastle model and the unmet need. And I will say I'll put all the links in the show notes to these for people. You talked about the article for Psychology Today and the space model. And you talked about building in the reward system and having that kind of reward ladder. And then we've also talked about kind of the narrative therapy about creating a storybook and looking at perhaps things like worry monsters.
Oh, yeah. Awesome. Thanks for the summary. Yeah. And I don't know if you want me to kind of expand on storying, but, making videos and photo books and things, just getting really creative with it so that it becomes something really fun. And I think anytime I've been able to turn something frightening into something fun, we've normally had good results. So it could be, honestly, it could be trauma like car accident. We've been able to, you wouldn't believe it, been able to turn it into a fun story about. going up in a spaceship and, you know, whatever it happened to be, but turning it on its head, making it fun, and just being able to cope with it and laugh about it in a way that can kind of, just makes the fear go away, really. And it's really, can be really helpful.
That's a really good reminder, actually, Esther, because I think as parents, we can get caught up in the difficulty with our child, and therefore we become stressed. And when we're in that place, it's really difficult to be playful about things, isn't it? But actually, as you say, and I suppose that's the gift of being, doing your role, because you're somehow removed from the situation. So you can have that almost detached emotional sense from it. But actually, as you're talking, it's making me go, oh yeah, if I could take a step back with my child, I have access to all these different resources. But when I'm stuck in it, I don't necessarily feel that I've got the access to those.
Oh, absolutely. You get tunnel vision, and it becomes even worse. It's part of that that threat system in our brains, isn't it, that you so cleverly like go through with us. You know, once you've got that tunnel vision and you're stressed and come on, if your child has done something, we're talking about little children at the moment, but if it's something really serious, it's, of course you get tunnel vision, because there's a real danger there, isn't there, that you need to deal with. But I think what else can help is there's so much obviously online and so many kind of apps around like meditation and mindfulness for kids as well.
Yeah.
And I think getting children doing mindfulness meditation young is actually a really good idea. My son was teaching me actually, like quite recently. It was so nice. And sometimes we do it. We're lying in bed and we'll just like imagine like beautiful scenes and stuff, the relaxing scenes. And he'll talk me through it. So he's like developing the language for it as well, which is really nice. So
I love that.
Yeah.
And so I suppose that was going to be my question. You sounds like you've got your way with your son. How do you build in these meditation and mindfulness? Because I know as adults, we know how beneficial it can be and we can struggle to fit it in. What are the different ways? It sounds like actually as you're going to bed, your son naturally might start to do that. But if you were kind of advising a parent or giving them a tip to try out and experiment, what are some of the ways in which you found it's helped other families?
It's really hard to find time for everyone. I mean, if you've got 2, 3, 4, I'm sorry, not even if you've got one child, it's a lot. But you know, you're coordinating 3, 4, 5, 6 schedules, aren't you? Between you and dad or your partner and the kids, and they've got their little lives and their little schedules, the different classmates, the different friends. It is hard. And I think, we can't beat ourselves up about not being able to find the time as long as we plan to. And I think I'm getting better now at saying, well, this just isn't going to happen unless I do it at 1:00 on a Friday or whenever. I literally have to say, what's realistic? Because of our schedules, the only real time for X is this time. So if I don't put it in the diary now, it won't happen. So I'm a lot better at saying, and I've been doing this with things like rest as well. If I don't put that rest in the diary as something to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think brings me to another point. I don't know if I'm answering your question here, but I also think that if you're not able to find a child psychologist or child therapist for your child, I think it can be really helpful to go to therapy yourself and to make time for yourself. And I wouldn't be surprised, because we are, as counsellors or psychologists or psychiatrists or any kind of child therapist, or adult therapist, you think about relationships. That's what you do. And I think even if you were to go to your own psychologist or counsellor and say, I'm having a problem with my child in this way, or I'm worried about my child in this way, I think that even they could help, because you're thinking about your relationship and how you can help. And even though they're not the direct client of your counsellor psychologist, I think that's still a way in to kind of indirectly get that help. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Because, as you say, any good professional will think of the system you're operating in. And I always think of it as a dance, isn't it? That actually we can get stuck in a dance with our child and not feel stuck about how to help them. Whereas we can change our own steps. Hopefully it influences them in the dance that they're doing. And I know for myself, I'm a big believer in getting regular therapy, and I have for a long while, and it's part of my professional accreditation and I have to do it. But, personally, it's helped me hugely. And I think that often with my son, particularly, if I'm not careful, I can co-escalate with him. And so when he has difficulty in a situation, I can get stuck in that emotion with him. And what I've had to work on is how do I regulate myself? And that hopefully role models for him how to regulate himself. But if I'm not able to do that, he's unlikely to be able to do it either.
That makes so much sense. Absolutely. Because what I love, I went on safeguarding training. It was one of the trainings I did a long time ago. And the instructor said, children are like mirrors and sponges. And that just stuck with me because it's so true. They're going to mirror what we do and they're going to absorb everything we do. So if we can work on ourselves, at the very least, I think it will have some benefit for our children. Does that make sense?
Totally. And I'm a big believer in that. And I think the empowering message in that is when it feels so out of control and you don't know how to help your child.
Yeah.
Start with yourself. That is something that's in your control. And hopefully that will have the knock-on positive impact.
And that's the other piece of advice that it still mind boggles me a little bit today, but I've accepted it. The notion of putting on your mask before you put on your child's on the airplane. Do you see what I mean? So it's kind of, you have to self-care and you have to be in a place where you are able to help, I think, in order to be the best, help and parent that you can be for your child. And if that involves putting on your own gas mask first, then please do.
Yeah, and there's something, we talked about earlier, unless you can soothe your own nervous system, you're not going to be able to help your child regulate their own nervous system if you're not in that place. And it's so difficult because it is so triggering as a parent, isn't it? Your mama bear or your protective mechanism kicks in, and that threat response of, my child's suffering in some way and I want to alleviate it.
Absolutely. And there's something really difficult sometimes about family history. And if you see, because I might do a family genogram or family tree with a child or family, or I might just kind of do it as they're talking, and maybe it'll be something private that I keep as a part of my formulation.
Mm-hmm.
But when you think about generations of, it could be mental health within the other, older generations, or patterns within the family that have happened, that have been passed down. But it can be a really helpful tool for you to do yourself as well. So if you sit down and do your family tree, you might think, well, how is this relevant to today? What what my child's going through. But it can be really revealing, because people have looked back at their family trees and said, oh, come to think of it, my child just got a diagnosis of ADHD, and come to think of it, when I look at the family history, I can see, this uncle or this aunt or this grandparent, they used to behave in this sort of way as well.
Yes. Yeah.
So it might not be something medical or something neurological, but it could be how your cultural beliefs or beliefs have been passed down, or religious beliefs, or any kind of thinking thinking and behaviour can be passed down as well.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I hope I'm not...
No, it does. It makes absolute sense. And I'm trained in systemic coaching, which I think is really what you're talking about here, is about family systems. And I always remember my mentor talking about, imagine that you're a peacock with this beautiful tail, and each feather of that tail is a system you belong to. And it could be your country of origin, your family of origin, your family of procreation, your educational system, your relationship system, your employment system. All of these different systems can either resource you or entangle you. And getting clear on that, about actually where might I be entangled, that's that's becoming unhelpful for this issue, and where might it be resourcing me as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and very sadly, there are intergenerational patterns for certain things.
Yeah,
but also, as you say, there are opportunities as well to look within that, and there's a lot of self-discovery in there, I think, and resourcing as well.
You've given some fabulous tools and strategies there. And I'm just wondering, if somebody did need to be signposted on and did need more professional help, where could you suggest that they go to?
So I think there's a long and short answer. So the slightly longer answer is that I know it's very, very difficult to work out as a parent. Does my child need a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a counsellor, a child therapist? Do you see? And I think, parents come to me with that question, what is a clinical psychologist, and how do you work differently to a psychotherapist? And there's a lot, I can give you some links on that if that would be helpful. But I think you've almost got to have a little bit of a formulation yourself as a parent as to what's going on, so that you know what kind of level of training or what specialism you want your child's support to look like. So depending on who you would choose, you'd have their professional bodies like the HCPC, Health and Care Profession Council, or the BPS, the British Psychological Society, or the UKCP, all the other, do you know what I mean? All the other professional bodies you can go to. And that's a really good way of kind of finding directories for people who have got the accreditation and regulated. So you've got the kind of the professional represent, like the professional memberships and regulatory bodies that you can go on the website and find a qualified practitioner if they work privately, that is, or but that's another story, isn't it? Because there's like NHS and there's kind of private as well.
Mm.
But then you've also got these incredible charities like Young Minds, Childline, Samaritans, lots and lots of charities where you have a counsellor, and they may not have a doctorate qualification, it's unlikely, but you may not need that. It may just be really amazing to connect your child with the right organisation and a counsellor within that who are, kind of got more specialism within that area, because they kind of, maybe it was just, if it was, say, domestic violence charity or something, that would be kind of what they mainly specialise in. So maybe that they'd be counselling mainly, the counsellor will be informed by that. So when you pick a charity, the counselling will be informed by the kind of overarching mission of the charity. But you might need treatment. So that's when a clinical psychologist, if it was more severe, you might, because what we do is we're doctor psychology because we provide evidence-based treatment. And that includes things like cognitive behavioural therapy and all the other kind of therapies that are, depending on what therapies we're trained in. So I won't list all of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, so because I think it is a minefield, because you've got all these different types of therapies, which I couldn't list all of them.
Yes.
So then you need to think, what is it? Do I want someone who's got a broad range of therapy skills they can offer, or a counsellor who maybe has one therapy that they offer, or one or kind of more general counselling, like listening and supportive skills there.
Brilliant. That's really useful. And I suppose, at what point in this might you go, actually, it's the NHS and I need to go and speak to my GP? Or is that, again, really, really situation dependent?
Well, that's the thing. And it's a shame I've not said that first, because, I worked for the NHS for 12 years. That'd be the first thing I'd have said to you years ago. It's just that my experience, and I'm not saying don't go to your GP, absolutely do. I think go to GP first. Unfortunately, I think we do live in a bit of a postcode lottery.
Yeah.
So I'm really sad to say that every borough, every locality is very, very different in the provision they provide and what the waiting times are. and what the commissioning looks like. And so I would always say the GP is the first person you should go to, and they will be able to help hopefully map more local services.
Mm-hmm.
Because the ones I'm mentioning are national, aren't they? And they're like kind of big directories and things. But you want to know what's available locally to you, particularly if you want face-to-face, not just telephone or online. And yeah, I'm not sure. I'm quickly just mentioning a private organisation, the Association of Child Psychologists in Private Practice.
Okay, yeah.
So, because I'm thinking parents often want face-to-face, and they're more likely to get see a private psychologist face-to-face. That's one of the organisations that I'm registered with as well. But the NHS, yeah, I don't know if you want me to say a bit more about that.
Well, no, I think what I'm hearing you say is that actually going to your GP is a useful thing, but depending on, I suppose, that GP and what postcode you're in, the advice and the signposting you get may differ. And what you've also done there is empower us with, well, here's some other stuff that you might look at alongside that, and you can marry those two together and find what's right for you, your situation, your child.
Oh, absolutely. And if they're at university counsellors, so, or, anywhere that the child is based, school counsellors,
Mm-hmm.
There might be within that organisation, or in that school or uni, or if they're working, you might have a grown-up child, then their work might have private medical cover. And I haven't mentioned private medical cover at all, but there's lots of brilliant private medical cover who will fund lots and lots of sessions. I don't know if you want me to name them, but they're on my website as well. But if you have a private medical insurance policy, Bupa are a big one, they refer a lot of children to us. I think it's worth getting a policy, because I believe it works out cheaper, and that it will cover other things as well. So you won't just get the psychology bit or the psychiatry bit or the counselling. You get Bupa health cover, say. But yeah, I don't know if I can be an advert for Bupa, but we're just registered with all these different private medical insurance companies, and I think a lot of your workplaces might be registered, and your child's mental health cover might come under your work private medical insurance.
And just thinking back to what we said earlier about, go and get your own support. So even if your child's not covered, you might be covered to get your own support, to guide your, to support yourself through that. So I think you've given us loads of signposting there. And I think, for each and every one listening that might need to pursue those, they'll be able to do their own research from that. So I think that's really useful.
Thank you.
So I suppose if there was just one thing that you hope a working mum or whoever's listening to you speak right now take away from this, what would you want that to be?
Do you know, I hope this isn't too corny. Don't forget the fun. It's taken us years to be able to get on holiday because of COVID, and I had 3 children and within 8 years. So it's very difficult. Don't forget the fun and the laughter and the joy. And, like you said, something about getting caught up in the difficulty of it all. Even just no matter how difficult a situation's been with a child or family, how much difficulty they're going through, if in our sessions we come up with fun and happy and enjoyable things to do as a family or with their friends, if any age, actually, I was going to say if they're teens, but just things to look forward to. Never underestimate just the importance of fun and just enjoying life, I'd say.
And how easy can we, I know that my life can steal the joy unless I intentionally put it in there. So
me too.
So thank you, Esther, for coming on and sharing all of this. So if people want to find out more about you and your work, where would you signpost them to your stuff?
So our website is www.lifespanpsychology.co.uk. We're a team. I'm always hiring because it's growing. As you can hear, there's unfortunately, we're all impacted, and so my team is growing. Basically, there's more and more mental health referrals coming through, and so you can find us at www.lifespanpsychology.co.uk or email me at info@lifespanpsychology.co.uk. And if you're a child psychologist listening, it'd be amazing to have you on board, because we'd love to have another one on board, so we can help a lot more families out there. I should have capacity in the new year for like more parent consultations. So I'm hoping to be able to kind of free up some time to work more with parents. But again, really quite a capacity with the one-to-one sessions that I can offer at the moment. So that's a shame.
Brilliant. Well, just thank you for making time to come and do this, and thank you for the work that you're doing in the world, because it's so vital to obviously children and families and adults alike, because I know you work across the whole lifespan with your clients. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. You've been an inspiration for years, and I absolutely love your podcast. So to be actually on it now, I hope I've done it justice. And thanks for having me.
You absolutely have, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Esther Cole.
If you've enjoyed this episode of Wisdom for Working Mums, please share it on social media and with your friends and family. I'd love to connect with you too, so if you head over to wisdomforworkingmums.co.uk, you'll find a link on how to do this. And if you love the show and really want to support it, please go to iTunes, write a review and subscribe. You'll be helping another working mum find this resource too. Thanks so much for listening.